Hello, friends, and welcome to a brand new adventure. In this episode, we'll be listening to the story of Daniel and Aria. Grab a cup of coffee and sit back. Enjoy the show. I spent one night stranded with the most beautiful alien woman in the galaxy. But now she wants me to be hers forever. Daniel had exactly 3 rules for flying the empty stretch past the Velnum Belt, and by the time the ion storm hit, he had broken all 3. Rule 1, never fly tired. Rule 2, never fly a route your insurance company won't cover. Rule 3, the important one, was don't argue with the weather. And he was busy breaking that one aloud when the sky turned the color of a bruise and his shuttle stopped pretending it had opinions of its own. Come on, you beautiful piece of junk," he said, patting the console the way you'd calm a nervous horse. The Marigold, yes, he'd named her, and no, he would not be taking questions. Shuddered and dropped. Violet lightning cracked across the canopy. His coffee, which had survived 4 years of hard living, chose this moment to fling itself across the cabin and die. That, Daniel informed the storm, was uncalled for. The moon came up to meet him the way bad decisions always do. Fast and with total commitment. He wrestled the Marigold into something a generous person might call a landing and a coroner might call a warning. Metal shrieked. Something behind him made a sound no machine should make. Then, mercifully, stillness, and the ringing quiet of a man discovering he is somehow still alive. He was not, it turned out, the only one. A second craft had come down through the same chaos, close enough that he saw its belly lights guttering out across the ridge. By the time he'd pried his door open and stumbled into the wind, a figure was already moving toward the only shelter for 1,000 miles. A hollow of rock beneath an overhang, the moon's single act of hospitality. They reached it at the same moment and stopped, each taking the measure of the other. She was, and Daniel would spend the rest of his life failing to describe this properly, the most beautiful being he had ever seen. Her skin held a soft, luminous yellow, like sunlight caught and kept in amber, and her eyes were wary and bright and fixed on him with the flat calculation of someone deciding whether he was a threat, a fool, or lunch. Her ears swept up into delicate points. Everything else about her was startlingly, disarmingly human. He knew what she was. Her people and his had spent 2 generations not quite at war, trading suspicion across a border neither could see. He should have reached for something, a weapon, a speech. Instead, he said, "You wouldn't happen to have coffee, would you?" Mine defected. She stared. A muscle near her mouth twitched, then went still, as though smiling were a foreign custom she'd read about, but never tried. "Sit down," she said, in accented, careful standard, "before the wind takes you. You're not built for weather." He sat. She was right, and he hated that she was right, and there was something almost restful in being so quickly understood. Her name, she offered, after a long stretch of watching him fumble a fire out of scavenged wiring and stubbornness, was Aria. She said it the way you'd hand someone a thing that mattered, and Daniel, who introduced himself, who explained about the Marigold, who apologized to the storm on the ship's behalf, noticed her ears tilt when he talked, tracking him like curiosity had a shape. "You name your vessel," she observed. "You speak to it. You apologize to it." "She's been through a lot," he said. "We both have. It's a whole thing." "And this is normal? Among your kind?" "Absolutely not. That's why it's special." The twitch came back to her mouth, and this time it won. When Aria smiled, it was a small, reluctant, genuinely staggering event, and Daniel felt the temperature in the hollow rise by several degrees that had nothing to do with the fire. Outside, the storm threw its violet tantrum against the sky. Inside, 2 strangers who'd been raised to be enemies discovered they were both, underneath it all, just tired people a very long way from anyone who knew their names. They traded small things, the taste of real rain, the names of stars they'd each grown up calling something different, the particular loneliness of a job that keeps you always moving and never anywhere. She laughed once, surprised out of herself by one of his worst jokes, and clapped a hand over her mouth as though she'd dropped something valuable. "You should do that more," Daniel said before he could stop himself. "We do not," Aria said quietly, and the words came slower now. laugh easily, or feel easily. My people, when we do, it is not a small thing. It is not for a night. She looked at him then, really looked, and the space between them across the little fire went suddenly warm and dangerous and impossibly narrow. It is for a lifetime, and beyond. Daniel opened his mouth to make a joke. For the first time in his life, he found he had none, only the strange, quiet certainty of a man who has fallen a very long way and landed at last precisely where he was meant to be. The night, it turned out, was very long, and neither of them was in any particular hurry to end it. They talked the way people only talk when the universe has stranded them somewhere with nothing to prove and nowhere to be. Daniel told her about growing up on a station so small it had a single tree in a pressurized dome, and how as a boy he'd been convinced the tree was homesick and used to whisper to it about planets it might have come from. Aria did not laugh at this. She went quiet in a way that was somehow worse and better than laughing. "You have always done this," she said, "spoken to lonely things. I prefer to think of it as excellent people skills applied to a broader clientele," Daniel said. "Trees, ships, beautiful strangers with weaponized cheekbones." That earned him the smile again. Quick, reluctant, gone before she could catch it and put it back. He was beginning to understand that her smiles were a currency her people spent carefully, and that he had somehow, through no discernible merit, been handed several without asking. She told him things in return, slowly, like a person unlatching windows in a house that had been shut a long time. That her craft had not been a trade vessel but a survey ship, and she flew it alone by choice, because among her kind she had always felt the wrong shape, too curious, too quick to wonder about the very people she'd been taught to distrust, that she had spent years cataloging dead stars and emptier moons precisely because they asked nothing of her heart. "And how's that going?" Daniel asked, feeding the fire another curl of scavenged wiring. "It was going," Aria said, "excellently, until approximately 4 hours ago. Something happened to the air when she said it. The storm chose that exact moment to hurl a fork of violet light across the sky, close enough that the hollow lit up white-purple and the ground gave a low, resentful shudder, and Aria, composed, wary, unflappable Aria, flinched, and her hand landed on his forearm, and neither of them moved it. "Ion strike," Daniel said, mostly to have something to say. "The storm's just showing off now, pay it no mind." "You are trembling," she observed. "That's the cold." "It is not cold in here." "Then it's your terrifying charisma. Look, I don't make the rules of my own nervous system." She laughed then, properly, helplessly, both hands failing to catch it this time, and the sound filled the little stone hollow and did something to Daniel's chest that 4 years of solitude had left him wholly unprepared for. When it faded, she was still looking at him, and her amber skin caught the firelight and glowed, and the space between them had narrowed to something you could no longer politely call distance. "On my world," she said softly, "there is a thing we are warned about, a sickness of the mind that comes to travelers alone too long in the dark. The old word for it means, roughly, the false warmth. You mistake the nearest light for the sun. You believe a stranger is your whole sky, simply because they are the only face you have seen in the cold. Sounds serious. Is it fatal?" "Only," Aria said, "to who you were before." Daniel considered making a joke. He had one loaded. Something about his previous self having a poor credit rating and few redeeming qualities. Good riddance. And he watched it drift up and out of reach and let it go, because she was so close now that he could see the storm reflected twice in her eyes, and because some moments are so fragile that even the kindest joke would shatter them. "Aria," he said instead, "for what it's worth, I've been alone in the dark a long time, years, and I know exactly what the false warmth is supposed to feel like." He swallowed. "This isn't it. I've never once in my life mistaken a light for the sun, but I think I'd know the real thing if I ever stopped being a coward long enough to look at it." The storm quieted, degree by degree, the way even the loudest things eventually tire. And in the hush that crept into the hollow, Aria did the bravest thing Daniel had ever seen anyone do. She reached up, very slowly, and touched the side of his face, his rounded, ordinary human face, as though it were a star she'd spent her whole cataloging life looking for and never dared believe she'd find. "Then look," she whispered. "The storm will pass by morning. Whatever you are going to be brave about, do it now, while the world is small enough for it." And Daniel, who had rules, who had walls, who had spent a lifetime keeping the whole galaxy at the comfortable distance of a punchline, looked at her, and for the first time in longer than he could name, did not reach for a single joke to save himself. He did not kiss her. That surprised them both. Instead, Daniel took the hand that was resting against his face and held it, gently, in both of his, turned it over like something a museum would want under glass, and said, "I'm going to be honest with you," which for me is a rare and frankly alarming event. I want very badly to do something extremely brave right now. But I've known you for about 6 hours, half of which I spent unconscious in a crash, and the other half apologizing to my ship. I'd like the version of this that we don't regret when the sun comes up. Aria studied him. Then, slowly, her ears tilted in that way he was learning, meant she was pleased and trying not to show it. "You are," she said, "the strangest brave man I have ever met. I contain multitudes, mostly nervous ones, so they didn't. Instead, they stayed up the rest of the night doing something far more dangerous than kissing. They simply talked and let themselves be known." She told him her people's names for the constellations wheeling overhead as the storm thinned. That the cluster he called the Ladle, her world called the Listener, an ancestor turned to stars for the crime of loving someone she was forbidden to love. Daniel decided not to point out the on-the-nose nature of this, because he was a coward, but a growing one. He taught her to play a card game with a deck he kept in the marigold for exactly these emergencies, retrieved during a brief, howling, deeply regretted trip out into the wind. She was catastrophically good at it within 4 hands. "You're cheating," he accused. "I am simply observing your face," Aria said serenely, laying down a winning run. "You have the most honest face in the galaxy. It is like playing against a window. That's the nicest insult anyone's ever given me. On my world, it is not an insult. We prize it. A face that cannot lie is a rare and valuable thing." She gathered the cards with those amber hands. "We are taught to distrust smooth faces. Yours could not deceive a child. My ex-wife would have some notes on that theory." Aria went still, in the particular way she had. "You had a bonded mate." "Briefly, on paper. It's a long, dull story that ends with me flying cargo alone through ion storms, so you can probably fill in the emotional gaps yourself." He shrugged, and found to his own astonishment that the old ache had gone quiet. "She used to say I loved my ship more than I loved anything with a heartbeat. I told her the marigold never once asked me to be someone I wasn't." And was she right? About the ship? Absolutely. About the reason? He looked at Aria across the dying fire, at the storm glow fading on her skin, at the pointed ears and the wary eyes and the whole impossible fact of her. "I'm starting to think the problem was never that I couldn't love things with heartbeats. I think I just hadn't met the right one who'd bother to learn my terrible card game." The storm gave up somewhere around what would have been dawn on a more reasonable moon. The violet lightning stuttered out. The wind, having made its point, went home. And through a thin crack in the overhang, the first real light of the little moon came sliding in, pale gold, ordinary, and to Daniel's eyes the most beautiful sunrise anyone had ever bungled his way into. Aria watched it with an expression he couldn't read. "There," he said softly. "We survived. Told you the storm was mostly showing off." She didn't answer at first. When she did, her voice had changed. Some quiet solemnity had entered it, the way weather changes before you feel the temperature drop. "Daniel, there is something you should understand about my people, before the light gets any higher." That sounds ominous. Is this the part where you tell me you're secretly the moon's landlord and I owe rent? "It is the part," she said, and did not smile, "where I tell you that we do not do this." She gestured at the small, warm ruin of their night, the cards, the fire, the narrow space where two strangers had spent hours being unguarded. We do not open. We do not let ourselves be seen. Not because we cannot, because when we do, when one of us chooses to truly let another in, it is not a season or a mood or a night of bad weather and worse card games. It is the whole thing, all at once, and it does not come undone. Her eyes found his and held them, bright and terrified and utterly without armor. I have spent my life cataloging dead stars because they were safe. And then a foolish human apologized to a storm on behalf of his ship, and I made the one mistake my people are warned against their entire lives. Daniel's heart was doing something complicated and irreversible. Which mistake is that? He asked, though he already knew. I let you in, Aria said, and now there is no light in the galaxy that could make me want you back out. For a man who made his living with words, mostly the kind muttered at malfunctioning equipment, Daniel found he had run entirely out of them. I let you in, she had said, and now there is no light in the galaxy that could make me want you back out. And the sentence hung in the little stone hollow like something too bright to look at directly. He became aware that he'd been staring at her for a length of time that was rapidly crossing from romantic into medical. So, he managed finally, just to make sure I'm tracking. This isn't a night thing. For your people. This is a forever thing, Aria said. A forever thing, right. Great. And you're telling me this now, after I've already lost 4 consecutive hands of cards to you and shown you my honest window face, which apparently is the emotional equivalent of handing you my house keys. Yes. You couldn't have led with that? Hi, I'm Aria, careful. My people fall the way stars collapse, all at once and permanently. Would it have changed anything? Daniel opened his mouth, closed it, ran an honest inventory of the last several hours, the fire, the terrible jokes she'd laughed at anyway, the way the whole cold universe had somehow shrunk to the size of one warm hollow and one pair of wary amber eyes, and found, to his considerable inconvenience, that it would not have changed a single thing. No, he admitted. Damn it. No, it wouldn't have. Something eased in her shoulders that he hadn't known was tense. But she wasn't finished. She rose and moved to the mouth of the hollow, wrapping her arms around herself against the thin morning cold. And when she spoke again, her voice had gone careful in a new way. Not shy now, but braced, like a person setting down a weight they'd carried a long way. There is more, and you should have it before you decide anything. The bond among my kind, it is not only of the heart, it is written deeper. When one of us chooses, truly chooses, the choosing changes us. Our physicians can see it. A structure grows here. She touched the base of her skull. That was not there before. It is why we are so careful. Once it forms, it does not unform. It is not a decision we can take back the way you might return an ill-fitting coat. So it's biological. It is everything at once. Body, mind, whatever word your people use for the part that outlasts both. She turned to face him. I am telling you this because I will not have you mistake it for a spell, or a sickness, or the false warmth I warned you of last night. This is not that. I have looked at you in daylight now, Daniel. In the plain and unforgiving light, with the storm gone and no excuse left. And it is still true. Daniel sat with that. Outside, the pale gold sun was climbing, and somewhere at the edge of hearing a new sound had begun. A thin, rising whine he recognized with the specific dread of a man whose peace is about to be interrupted by paperwork. Aria, he said slowly. Before we get to the part where I say something that changes both our lives forever, and I want to, I'm working up to it. I promise. I've just got a lot of cowardice to burn through first. I have to ask you the single least romantic question in the galaxy. She frowned. What is it? Do you hear that? She went still, ears lifting, and caught it too. That rising whine, resolving now into the unmistakable throb of engines. Not the storm. Something built, something coming down through the clearing sky toward them, deliberate and fast. "Rescue!" Aria breathed, and the word came out sounding nothing like relief. Daniel scrambled to the mouth of the hollow beside her. There, dropping through the last violet wisps of the departed storm, came two craft in tight formation, one bearing the blunt orange markings of a human salvage and rescue outfit, the other slender and silver and unmistakably of Aria's people, both homing on the twin distress beacons their crashed ships had been screaming into the void all night. "Well," Daniel said, watching his ordinary life come roaring back to reclaim him. "On the one hand, we're saved, genuinely thrilled, big fan of not dying on a rock. And on the other hand, they have spectacularly terrible timing, and I was about 10 seconds from being brave." He looked at her, at the amber skin gone tense in the growing light, at the fear surfacing in eyes that had spent all night learning to trust him. "They're going to land. They're going to pull us apart, put us on separate ships, and hand us both a form to fill out in triplicate. And somewhere between here and the beacon, the whole galaxy is going to start reminding us of every reason two people like us aren't supposed to happen." Aria's hand found his, held on. "Then be brave quickly," she said. The two rescue craft came down on the far side of the ridge in a storm of dust and self-importance, and the moment they touched rock, the spell of the long night began to evaporate like breath on cold glass. Daniel had faced a lot of unpleasant things in his life. Customs officials, an ex-wife's lawyer, the inside of the Marigold's coolant tank, but nothing had ever felt quite so much like theft as watching two competent-looking crews spill out of their ships and begin, with brisk professional kindness, to peel his night apart at the seams. "Sir? Sir, are you injured? Can you walk?" A human medic in orange was suddenly in his face, waving a scanner that beeped disapprovingly at his general life choices. "Vitals are elevated. Heart rate's way up. Any pain?" "Only emotionally," Daniel said. "Long story. Involves cards." Across the ridge, he could see Aria being folded into the care of her own people. Tall, silver-clad figures with the same pointed ears and none of the same warmth. Their voices low and clipped and full of a formality that made his teeth ache. One of them, an older woman with the bearing of someone who filed reports for sport, was already speaking to Aria in their own tongue, and whatever she was saying made Aria's spine go straight and her face go smooth and unreadable in a way Daniel had not seen since the very first moment they'd met at the mouth of the shelter. "The window face," he thought with a lurch. "She's closing the window." "You'll want to come with us," the medic was saying, steering him gently toward the orange ship. "Standard protocol. Debrief, medical clearance. We contact your carrier. Get your salvage claim started on the Marigold. You got lucky, friend. Ion storm that size? Most folks don't walk away." "Yeah," Daniel said, not walking away. "Lucky. The other survivors not our jurisdiction. Their people handle their own. Separate debriefs, separate channels. Honestly, it's cleaner that way. Avoids a whole diplomatic headache." The medic said it the way people say things they've never once questioned. "You two didn't have any trouble, did you? Overnight? Sometimes when it's a mixed situation, there's, friction." Daniel looked at him. Then he looked across the ridge at Aria, at the amber skin catching the pale gold morning, at the fear she was hiding so well that only someone who'd spent all night learning her face could have found it at all. "No," he said quietly. "No trouble. Just two people who got stranded and figured out they weren't enemies. Turns out that's not actually very hard, when there's nobody around to tell you to be." The medic gave him the polite, uncomprehending nod of a man already thinking about lunch and moved off to log something. They were separating. He could feel it happening. The great indifferent machinery of two civilizations that had spent generations keeping careful distance was reasserting itself, gently, bureaucratically, with clipboards and protocols and reassuring tones. And if he simply let it, he would be on the orange ship within the hour, and Aria would be gone into the silver one. And someday this whole night would soften into a strange, warm story he told no one. Because who would believe it? And who would understand? and her people would see the little structure at the base of her skull, the one that only grows when someone truly chooses, and it would be there, and it would be permanent, and she would carry it alone. That last thought landed in Daniel's chest like a dropped tool. She had told him everything. She'd handed him the whole terrifying truth of what her night had cost her, in daylight, with no storm to blame. And she'd asked for nothing, because her people didn't, because she'd rather close the window and carry it silently forever than lay a single obligation on the honest human with the coward's heart and the excellent card face. Across the ridge, Aria turned. Just once. Their eyes met over 40 meters of dust and two crews of people determined not to notice, and she gave him the smallest possible nod, the kind that means it's all right, you don't have to, go, be safe, thank you for the night, and began to turn away toward the silver ship and the older woman and the smooth, closed, formal life she'd been raised inside. "Oh, Daniel said. The medic glanced back. "Sir, I'm going to do something extremely brave," Daniel announced, mostly to himself, "and probably extremely stupid, and I would genuinely appreciate it if nobody tried to scan me for it." He handed the man the disapproving beeping device. "Hold my window face." And he started walking, not toward the orange ship, not toward the safe, cleared, debriefed rest of his ordinary life, but across the ridge, through the settling dust, straight toward the silver ship and the woman standing frozen beside it, whose wary amber eyes were widening now with the dawning, disbelieving hope of someone watching the one thing they'd told themselves not to want turn around and come back. 40 meters is not a long walk. Daniel had walked further to avoid people at parties, but he made this particular crossing with his heart going like a failing engine, and the growing awareness that 2 entire crews had stopped what they were doing to watch the strange human march across a moon toward a delegation of people his species officially did not get along with. The older silver-clad woman stepped smoothly into his path. Up close, she was all cool authority and disapproving symmetry, and her standard, when she used it, was flawless and faintly weaponized. "This is not your concern, human. The survivor is in our care now. Return to your own vessel." "Right, yeah, about that." Daniel stopped, slightly out of breath, aware he'd prepared absolutely nothing to say. "See, normally I'm a huge fan of returning to my own vessel. It's my whole personality. Ask anyone. Ask my ex-wife. She'll have a slideshow." The woman's expression did not move. "Tough crowd," Daniel acknowledged. He looked past her, to Aria, who was staring at him with an expression caught exactly between hope and horror, the face of someone watching a man walk cheerfully into a situation she'd spent all night trying to spare him from. "Aria, your friend here says you're in her care and I should shove off. And she's probably right, and I've broken every rule I own in the last 12 hours, so what's one more?" "Daniel," Aria breathed. "You don't have to. I told you. It cost you nothing to leave. The bond is mine to carry. I would never." "I know," he said. "That's the whole problem. That's the single most infuriating thing about you. You'd carry it forever and never once send me the bill." He dragged a hand down his honest, unhideable face. "You told me your people fall all at once, permanently, and it grows a whole new piece of you that never comes undone. You told me that, in daylight, knowing it might scare me straight back to my cargo runs. You handed me the most terrifying truth I've ever heard and asked for nothing." He took a breath. "So here's mine, and it's less elegant, because I'm human, and we're a mess. I don't grow a structure at the base of my skull. I don't get a physician who can point at a scan and say, there, that's where he chose her. All I've got is this stupid window face and 4 years of talking to a ship because I was too much of a coward to talk to anyone who might talk back." He stepped around the older woman. Nobody stopped him. He suspected 2 crews were now openly filming. And then a storm dropped me on a rock with the most beautiful, insufferable, card-cheating woman in the galaxy, and she laughed at my worst jokes, and for one night the universe stopped feeling like a cold place I was flying through, and started feeling like... His voice caught, and he let it, because for once he wasn't reaching for the joke to save himself. Like somewhere I'd landed. On purpose. Like home had a location and I'd finally found the coordinates. Aria's eyes were very bright. "So no," Daniel said. I don't have your biology, but I know exactly what I'd be walking back to if I got on that orange ship. And it's a very clean, very safe, very lonely life where the only thing that ever loved me back was a shuttle named after a flower. And I've decided, in a fit of totally uncharacteristic bravery, that I fully expect to panic about later, that I'd rather be terrified with you than comfortable without you. The silver-clad woman said something sharp in their tongue. Aria answered without looking away from Daniel. Quiet, steady, final, and whatever it was, made the older woman go still, then incline her head a single stiff degree, and step back. What did you say to her? Daniel asked. I told her, Aria said, walking to him now, slowly, as though she still didn't quite believe he'd hold, that the survey drone that flies alone by choice has just filed the most important discovery of her career, and that it is not negotiable, and that the paperwork can wait. You cannot imagine, Daniel said, how attractive I find the phrase the paperwork can wait. And then she was close, close as the fire had made them, close as the whole long night, and she reached up and touched his ordinary face with her amber hand. And this time there was no storm to blame, and no rescue coming, and no reason left in the entire galaxy to stop. Stay, Aria whispered. Be mine. Foolish, honest, window-faced human. Be mine, and I will be yours, and it will be for a lifetime, and if my people are right about anything, well beyond it. On one condition, Daniel said, his forehead resting against hers, both of them ridiculous and glowing in the pale gold light while two civilizations pretended not to watch. Name it. You're never allowed to play me at cards again. My ego can't take a forever of that. Aria laughed, that helpless, unguarded, staggering laugh, the one her people spent so carefully. And Daniel decided he would happily lose every hand for the rest of his life if it kept sounding like that. Agreed, she said. And on a barren moon under a clearing violet sky, a man who had spent his whole life keeping the universe at the safe distance of a punchline finally stopped running, stopped joking long enough to mean it, and chose, all at once and permanently, in the only way that ever really counts, to stay. They found the marigold 3 days later, salvageable after all, and Daniel spent an afternoon apologizing to her while Aria watched from the hatch with the expression of a woman recalibrating her entire understanding of what she'd agreed to spend a lifetime beside. He named their next ship together. Aria pretended to object. She lost that argument the way she never lost at cards, on purpose and gladly. And that was the thing about the whole impossible business, the part Daniel would turn over in his mind for years afterward. How close he'd come to not walking those 40 meters. How easy it would have been to board the orange ship, fill out the form in triplicate, and let the machinery of the ordinary carry him back to a clean and lonely life he'd have called fine until the day he died. How the bravest thing he ever did wasn't surviving the storm at all. It was refusing to survive it alone. Because storms, in the end, are the easy part. Anyone can be brave when the sky is falling and there's no time to think. The real courage comes at dawn, in the plain, unforgiving light, when the danger has passed and every sensible voice tells you to be safe, to close the window, to walk back toward the comfortable thing that will never once ask you to be more than you already are. That's when most of us get on the orange ship. That's when most of us let the coordinates of home slip past, unclaimed, and tell ourselves it simply wasn't practical. So let me leave you with the question Daniel had to answer on that barren moon, the one I suspect the universe asks all of us sooner or later, in some quieter storm of our own. Who, or what, have you been keeping at the safe distance of a punchline? What window have you kept closed because opening it would cost you the tidy, lonely life you've learned to call fine? And if a storm dropped you tomorrow onto a rock beside the one thing you'd been told all your life not to want, would you walk the 40 meters? The end. We've reached the end of another story, friends. Please don't forget to hit the like button, leave your thoughts about the story in the comments below, and subscribe to our channel for more stories. See you in the next adventure.